In the busy streets of Kampala, the day was beginning like any other, with people rushing to their jobs, boda riders weaving through traffic, and market vendors opening their small stalls as the early morning sun slowly warmed the city. Yet, beneath the normal life of the city, there was always a quiet tension that had lived in the hearts of many citizens for years. A tension created by the long political rivalry between the president of Uganda, Yoweri Museveni Kyagulanyi, Kizza Besigye. Their disagreement had lasted for decades and had shaped many political conversations across the country, from the halls of government offices to the small wooden benches where elderly men gathered to discuss news and politics. For many Ugandans, the story of these two leaders had become almost like a legend that everyone knew but few truly understood. Because long before the political rivalry began, there had once been a time when both men had stood on the same side, with a shared dream of building a stable and prosperous nation. After years of struggle, older citizens who remembered those early days often spoke about it with a mixture of nostalgia and sadness, explaining how friendships in politics sometimes change when power, responsibility, and different visions for the future begin to pull people in opposite directions. On this particular evening, the city was slowly becoming quiet as the sun disappeared behind the distant hills and the golden light faded into a calm blue sky. And inside a modest but well-guarded home on the outskirts of the city sat Dr. Kizza Besigye, a man whose name had been at the center of Uganda's political storms for many years. He was sitting alone in a wooden chair near a small table covered with newspapers and handwritten notes. And although the house was peaceful, his mind was far from calm, because memories of the past were returning to him one after another, like waves on the shore of a lake. Lolipikev, an old newspaper that carried a faded photograph from many years earlier, showing him standing beside Yoweri Museveni during a moment of unity when the two men had worked together toward a common goal. And as he looked at the picture, a deep silence filled the room, because the image reminded him that history is often more complicated than the simple stories people tell on the streets or hear on the radio. Outside the house, the evening breeze moved gently through the trees, while distant sounds of the city continued in the background. But inside the room, Besigye remained still as he continued, thinking about the long journey that had brought him to this moment in his life. And for the first time in many years, he began asking himself a question that had never truly crossed his mind before. A question about whether the endless political battles had helped the nation move forward, or whether they had only deepened divisions among people who all called the same country their home. As the clock on the wall slowly moved toward midnight, he leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment, while reflecting on the many speeches he had given, the elections he had contested, and the countless debates that had taken place between him and the president of Uganda. Yet the more he thought about these events, the more he began to feel that something important might have been missing from all those years of struggle. That quiet feeling of reflection slowly grew stronger inside his mind as he stared once more at the old photograph lying on the table. And in that silent room in Kampala, a new and unexpected thought began to form in his heart. A thought that perhaps the future of the country might require something different from what had happened in the past. And although he did not yet know what that change might look like, he could already feel that the next decision he made would be one of the most important moments of his entire life. With that heavy thought resting quietly in his mind, he stood up from the chair and walked slowly toward the window, where the lights of the city shimmered in the distance like tiny stars scattered across the darkness. And as he watched the peaceful night of Uganda stretching far beyond the hills, he began to wonder whether it was finally time to take a step that no one in the nation would ever expect him to take. And that quiet question lingering in his mind would soon begin a journey that could change not only his own life, but also the story of an entire country. The quiet night in Kampala continued to stretch across the hills and neighborhoods as the lights of the city flickered in the distance. And Dr. Kizza Besigye remained standing near the window of his house while deep thoughts slowly moved through his mind, like slow clouds crossing a silent sky. The peaceful darkness outside seemed calm and ordinary. Yet, inside his heart, there was a storm of memories that had suddenly returned with great strength. Memories that reminded him of a time many years ago when life and politics had looked very different from what they had become today. As he continued looking into the distance, his mind slowly traveled back through the years to a time when he was still a young man full of determination and hope for the future of Uganda. And during those days, he had walked a path that was closely connected with the man who would later become the president of the nation, Yoweri Museveni. In those early years, their relationship had not been defined by rivalry or political arguments, but by a shared belief that Uganda could become a better and more stable country after a long period of struggle and uncertainty. Besigye clearly remembered the long discussions they had once shared about leadership, justice, and the responsibility of guiding a nation toward peace and development. And those conversations had often taken place late at night when the world was quiet and the future seemed wide open with possibilities. At that time, both men had believed strongly that their efforts would help build a nation where ordinary citizens could live with dignity, opportunity, and hope. But as the years continued to pass, the road that once united them slowly began to divide into two very different directions. And the disagreements that first started as simple differences of opinion gradually grew into serious political conflicts that could no longer be ignored. Each election season seemed to deepen the distance between them as speeches became sharper and supporters on both sides grew more passionate in defending their leaders. Bisigi sighed quietly as he remembered how those years had been filled with rallies, campagnes, and strong debates that echoed across towns and villages throughout Uganda. And although he had always believed he was fighting for what he thought was right for the nation, he could not ignore the reality that the rivalry had also created divisions among people who once lived together peacefully as neighbors and friends. He slowly returned to the small table where the old photograph still lay beside the newspapers and gently picked it up again while examining the faces captured in that frozen moment of history. And the more he studied the picture, the more he realized how time had changed everything around them, while the memories themselves had remained as clear as if they had happened only yesterday. For a long moment, he remained silent while holding the photograph, and a deep sense of reflection began to settle in his heart, because the image reminded him that political battles may shape history, but they also leave behind questions that can follow a person for the rest of their life. He began wondering whether there might still be a way to close the long chapter of rivalry that had defined so much of his public life. The night continued growing quieter as most of the city fell asleep. Yet Dr. Bisigi remained awake with his thoughts moving between the past and the future while he tried to understand what his next step should be. Somewhere deep inside his mind, a small but powerful idea was beginning to form. An idea that perhaps the time had come to consider something that would surprise not only his supporters, but the entire nation as well. That thought was still uncertain and fragile, like the first light of dawn before the sun rises. Yet it continued growing stronger with every passing moment. And as the clock slowly moved deeper into the night in Kampala, Dr. Bisigi realized that the memories of the past might soon lead him toward a decision that could change the course of his relationship with Yoweri Museveni forever. And while the city slept peacefully beneath the quiet sky of Uganda, the thoughts forming in that silent room were beginning to prepare the ground for a moment that would soon capture the attention